All right, welcome back to class. It's hard to believe that we're on chapter 7, which means that we're halfway through the semester. So just like the DePauw students and a lot of you at high school who are on midterms, we're halfway through, and which it's been great. I hope that you've enjoyed this. I really have enjoyed this. It's helped my preaching, some of the stuff that ends up working its way into homilies. So anyway, here we are. We're on chapter 7, which means if you've been following along, we're on the third commandment. We're going to go through all of them. And a couple of them will combine. But we're on the third commandment today, which is on keeping holy the Sabbath day. Keeping holy the Sabbath day. This is one of my favorite topics for two reasons. We'll get into that later, but I hope that this is something that helps you in your faith as well. I think that it will. So anyway, we want to look at the biblical references to this. There are many we could choose. But we're going to look at where this comes from, just a couple of them. 6 days shall work be done, but on the seventh day is a Sabbath of solemn rest. You shall do no work. It is a Sabbath to the Lord. And that comes from Leviticus, obviously, in the Old Testament there. God saying, rest on the Sabbath. Don't do any work. In fact, there are those who still keep the Jewish faith in a strict observance of the Jewish faith. Don't even do any work where they're not even allowed to use electricity in some cases and so forth. So they keep this. This was something that the Jewish people kept very seriously because God was very serious about it. Jesus comes along and, of course, again reiterates the importance of the Sabbath. Jesus was a Jew and continued to, and saw what Jesus felt like what he was doing, and it wasn't just a feeling. Jesus said, what I'm doing, I am a Jew. I am the Messiah that the Jews are talking about. So Jesus doesn't come to destroy, he comes to fulfill all that the Jews believe. So he says the Sabbath, and this is really important and an emphasis for us as we go forward today. The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. The Sabbath day, this day of rest, God gives it to us. And this is such a perfect example of all the things we've been saying. The things that God's doing for us, the things that God asks of us are not for God. They're for us. And so when God says, keep a Sabbath day, keep a day of rest, go to Mass, He's saying, this is for us, for your sake. God's not saying, I want you to come to the Sabbath because I need you to. God's giving us the Sabbath because we need it. We need it. We need to go to Mass. We need a day of rest. And that's what the Sabbath is for. Jesus is making this very obvious statement. I'm not making the Sabbath up for myself. I'm making the Sabbath for you. It was made for mankind. Okay? So this is a great illustration of all those things we've been talking about throughout this whole semester. Let's look at a couple of points that it's important to know about the Sabbath. The Jewish people celebrated the Sabbath on Saturday. They felt that Sunday, in their calendars, Sunday was the first day of the week, the day that everything started again. So they always, in the Old Testament, the Sabbath was Saturday. Now, the early church comes along after Jesus, and they saw themselves too as Jews who believed that Jesus was the fulfillment of what they had been waiting for. The Jews were waiting for the Messiah. We believe that Jesus was the Messiah and is the Messiah. So the early church did not say, hey, we need to go start a new church. We're not Jews anymore. They thought of themselves, and we are keeping and fulfilling, we are an outpouring, we are a flowing forth of the Jewish tradition. And so the early church kept going to the synagogue on Saturday to keep the Sabbath. They would go to the synagogue and they would listen to the readings from Scripture just like they had always been doing because they were Jews. So you would go on Saturday and hear the Scriptures and have the readings from the Torah and basically what we would do now is the liturgy of the Word. Now the interesting thing is then because Jesus rose on Sunday, they would also have a second celebration on Sunday, which would be the liturgy of the Eucharist, the Last Supper. So they would gather usually in homes early on, and then they began building church structures as it became more accepted and more expanded under in the Edict of Milan under Constantine in the 300s. Okay, But anyways, early on, it was we go on Saturday. If I'm an early Christian in the early church, I go to the synagogue on Saturday, have the liturgy of the Word, read Scripture, and then on Sunday I go to somebody's house and have Mass. And that was how it was, the liturgy of the Eucharist, the second part of Mass. Now, this evolves then into everything taking place on Sundays, both the liturgy of the Word and the liturgy of the Eucharist, what we now have combined into Mass. This happens, this Saturday and Sunday getting combined into one day happens for a couple of reasons. It happens, first of all, the Jewish temple, the synagogue, was destroyed in the year 70 A.D. So only about 30 years after Jesus ascends into heaven, the temple is destroyed. So they don't have a place to go anymore and hear the liturgy of the Word, to have these readings, to gather anymore because the synagogue is destroyed. The temple is destroyed. And the other thing is that in AD 85, about 50 years after Jesus ascends into heaven, at a meeting called the Council of Jamnia, the Jewish people basically expel the Christians from the Jewish tradition. And it's not the Christians that said, we're not Jews anymore. It's the Jews who said, you're not Jews anymore. You are not faithful Jews. If you believe in Jesus, you are not a Jewish person. So the split comes from the Jewish people. So they're not allowed. If you're a Christian, then after the Council of Jamnia, you're basically not allowed to go and participate in the synagogue. So they couldn't go to that anymore on Saturday. So they had to make this, and so over time that evolves in saying, let's have the liturgy of the Word and the Mass, and the liturgy of the Eucharist together, and let's do it all at the same time, and let's do it on Sunday, because that's the day that Jesus rose from the dead. So it's really important to understand that we didn't just, in 34 AD, after Jesus goes to heaven, or whatever year, 33, whenever it is that Jesus goes back to heaven, it wasn't like Christians said, you know what, we're going to start our own religion. They thought of themselves as faithful Jews, so they considered and continued to practice their Jewish faith, and they saw their Christianity as a part of that faith. And that I never understood that growing up, and I think that that's really important, that we understand how that has happened, how we've gotten to this point of Sunday Mass that we go to every Sunday. I think that's really fascinating. I think an objection that people have about the Mass, I hear this a lot, isn't the Mass really stiff and structured and not like the early church having their Mass in their homes? Gold chalices, priest wearing an alb and vestments and books of prayers, isn't that all? Why can't we just keep the Sabbath in our homes like they did in the early church? Why can't we just have somebody come? Why can't we just gather in small groups and so forth? That's a good question, but I think it's really important. Let's look back at the Nativity, the birth of Christ. We're getting ready to celebrate that in a couple of months, right, at Christmas, okay? And everybody loves it. So the first Nativity was in a barn. Jesus was born in a barn, right? Or a place of great. There was a lot of. There wasn't much. He was outside. No room in the inn. All that sort of thing, right? Now, as we have come to realize more and more what something is, we celebrate it more with more festivity, more solemnity. We add things to it. We make it more elaborate, and that's not a bad thing. That's us realizing what it was. There were hardly. A couple of shepherds, a couple of the magi, etc., recognize the birth of Christ, but that's it. It's out in the barn, it's out in the middle of, the cold and the outdoors and all that. Everybody was just going about their business in Bethlehem and didn't even recognize it, right? But now, 2,000 years later, we recognize more fully what was taking place there, so we celebrate it with great joy. And most of us build our year around Christmas, and we look forward to it, and we celebrate it with trees and lights and all those things. And that's not a bad thing. That's us realizing, oh my goodness, God became man. And so we celebrate it with more joy, with more festivity, more solemnity. In the same way, in the upper room, when Jesus has the first Mass and he gives his body and blood to his apostles, they didn't fully understand what was taking place, right? And certainly not most of the world was just running around. Nobody else was there. There was just the 13 of them, the apostles and Jesus. Maybe there were a few other people there too, but it was this small group. And hardly anybody realized it. But now, as it unpacks over the centuries and we recognize, oh my goodness, God was giving us His body and blood to consume, now we celebrate it with more solemnity, more joy, more festivity. We keep the body and blood in precious vessels, things that are precious to us. We celebrate and surround it with music and all these sorts of things, right? So this is not a perversion. It's not a polluting of that early, church community. It's that we've continued to grow and understand more and more what's taking place at the Mass. It's also important to realize that God speaks to us through the church and has revealed how He would like to be worshiped. He did that in the Old Testament. He told the Jewish people, He said, hey, here's how I want my temple built. I want it to look like this. Here's how the worship's going to take place. You need gold things. You need to treat the things that are in the temple with reverence and respect, and it needs to be made out of materials that are suitable to reflect the fact that God is here, that I am here dwelling in this place. He had very specific outlines for how He wanted to decorate it and how He wanted it to look and whatever kind of artwork and all those kinds of materials and what the priest is supposed to wear. That was in the Old Testament. And in the same way, He's doing that now. God speaks to us through the church, and the church says this is how Mass is to be celebrated. It's not a perversion. It's not like, well, it would be better if we could all just sit around in the dirt in a barn and, have Mass that way. No, that wouldn't be better. That wouldn't be more like it was. That wouldn't be more like Jesus wants it to be. No, Jesus speaks to us through the church. Jesus, this is an outflowing of what we've been doing since the Old Testament. Okay? And so all those things combined, that's why Mass is the way it is. Okay? I don't think anymore, I don't think that what I'm doing on Sunday, what we're celebrating on Sunday in the Mass, is anything other than exactly what God is asking it to be for us from the church. We're celebrating exactly how God is asking us to do that. And the other important thing that I'll say about this at the bottom, we're getting ready to, we're restoring our church at Annunciation. We're talking about maybe adding on or, things at St. Paul's at some point down the road, way down the road, right? It's important to know we don't need, you and I, people that actually believe and follow Christ, and we're Catholic and we come every week and we get it. We might be terrible people, we're horrible sinners, always in need of God's mercy, but at least we're here and we get it. I don't need Mass in a temple. I don't need Mass in a church. If I was on the run or we're being persecuted, I'd have Mass out in the forest. I've had it out there before, on trips and so forth. We don't need architecture. We don't need good music. We don't need the church to look nice. We don't need any of those things. We still believe. The church is supposed to look a certain way, and the Mass is supposed to be celebrated in a certain way with a certain solemnity, surrounded by certain things, beauty and gold chalices and so forth. More so for the people who don't believe yet. The people who are stopping by that weekend or who just happen to walk into our church on a Tuesday when it's open but nothing's going on because they are too afraid to come to a Mass. We are supposed to have the temple for the Jewish people was supposed to look a certain way so that when people came, they said, these people really believe something special happens here. If we just gathered in a gymnasium, would God still be there if we had Mass? Yes. But if it didn't look a certain way and if it wasn't celebrated with a certain solemnity and what the priest wears and the gold chalices and the artwork and all those other things, they're there for the people who don't believe yet. That's why God asks us to celebrate and to decorate both the Jews to decorate their temple in a certain way and laid it all out. It was for the people who didn't believe yet so that they'd say, you know what? God dwells here. Something special happens here. These people believe that something special is taking place here. That's what it's all for. That's why we're fixing our church at Annunciation, so that the people that come will see and say to themselves, wow, this is different. This isn't just a gym. This isn't just the YMCA. They believe that God actually dwells here. So that's what's going on with the Mass. And that's why we have the Mass laid out the way that it is. And that's why the church asks us to do that. Okay. Speaking of the Sabbath, we have two obligations that God is very serious about in the Scriptures and through the church. Two very specific things. And God is very strict, or very strict isn't right. God emphasizes these things very importantly in the Scriptures and through the church. The first is the obligation to go to Mass every Sunday or Saturday night, right? And every holy day of obligation. Go to Mass. unless the exceptions would be if you are sick or if you're taking care of an infant or someone else who's sick. Those are basically the only exceptions. Or you can't get to some Mass. Let's say it's 10 hours away and you just can't get there, the closest Mass, right? Another thing is people will say, another exception can be work. A couple of things to consider with the work. First of all, am I providing some service that everybody needs? If that's the case, then obviously I need to go to work. If I'm a nurse, if I'm a doctor, if I'm taking care of the power plant, those sorts of things. If I'm a police officer or a firefighter, then working on Sunday is totally different. That's fine, right? But if I'm just like a lifeguard, or I'm working at the bowling alley, or I'm working at the gas station, then that might be something where, I need to be saying to myself, can I get off? I mean, do I have to work on Sundays? My boss telling me I have to be fired, or that I have to work on Sunday or I'm going to be fired? And if that's the case, so what I really need to be doing ideally is working my work structure around the fact so that I can get Sunday off. I need to tell my boss, hey, this is a religiously important thing to me. I need to be off on Sunday. I need to go to Mass, and I need to keep the Sabbath. If the boss says, hey, you're going to get, that's the first thing, how serious do I take my faith? Do I ask, even approach or ask my boss to have that time off? The other thing is then, let's say that your boss comes, many bosses would say, hey, I get that, I understand that. Yeah, we'll schedule you. You don't have to work on Sundays. But let's say your boss comes back and says, you know what, you're going to be fired if I can't give you Sundays off. Then, okay, in the short term, can I work on Sunday? Perhaps, depending on how bad, what the situation is. But how many teenagers have to have the money that comes in from a job? I don't know. Maybe it's one thing if you're working and you're an adult and you're trying to feed your family and your boss says, hey, you're going to get fired if you don't get off, if you don't work on Sundays, that's it. You're going to get fired. Well, in that situation, I would say it's probably okay in the short term to keep that job, but I would also be working to find another job, another way out of that. But if you're a teenager, you're not doing some job that's essential to the good of mankind and helping people save people's lives and so forth and keeping things going, is work really something that you have to be at? And I think that that's just a question that we need to pray through and discern and use prudence about. And I think most of the time what we end up finding is, if we're really honest, I don't have to work on Sunday. Yeah, I might get $60 or $80 more to go hang out and go to the movies, but is this essential work, or is this just work because I want to have more stuff? I want to have nicer shoes, or I want to be able to have more spending money. If that's the case, then that's not a good reason. That's not a sufficient reason to be missing Mass. The other thing is, if I have to work on Sunday, I can go to Mass on Saturday night, right? There's Mass times basically from 4 o'clock on Saturday all the way through 8 o'clock on Sunday night. Nobody hardly works all of those times where Mass is being offered. So that's important. Also, a lot of people, vacations don't count. There's no exception. There's nothing in the third commandment that says unless you're on vacation, then you don't have to go to Mass. There's nothing in the church's teaching. There's nothing in the catechism that says anything about traveling or being on vacation. In fact, in a positive way, I find Masses at other churches to be really awesome and a lot of fun. You get to see a new place, a new building, a new priest, hear a new homily, different type of homily from a different personality and all these sorts of things, different music. How do they do it here? It's also cool to see how much we have in common. Oh my gosh, that's not really that different here in Georgia than it is in Indiana, or it's not really different in England, as it's about the same as it is in the United States. It's really neat to see that. So I just wanted to make that comment. So if you're on vacation, you still have to go to Mass, right? Have to and get to. We have to say have to because so many times we have to be told, God has to tell us, but really it should be when we're living our faith, we really start to realize, you know what, this is something that I get to do. And that's the important thing. Another comment about traveling and so forth, just because I have sports, that doesn't count either, right? I mean, and ultimately, we live in a culture that is just totally obsessed with sports. Traveling teams, and I'm on 19 volleyball teams, and I got to go to all this stuff. What's the priority? I mean, that's really what it comes down to. What's the priority? Is Sunday, am I going to keep holy the Sabbath day, as the third commandment says, or am I going to do everything else that I want to do on Sunday and not keep it holy? And God takes that holy day very seriously because, again, it's for our own good. There's the irony. God has to mandate something for us because we won't do it and we don't keep it on our own. We will look for ways to not keep the Sabbath. We look to sign up for teams, and we look to travel, and we look to do all of our jobs and groceries, etc. I want to just show a real quick video about the Mass. I think it's really good. It's kind of a promotional for a video series about the Mass, but it just does a great job of kind of helping us think about a little bit about the Mass and how awesome it is. And so I just want to watch that really quickly, and then we'll come back and pick it up from there.
The priest took the bread. He said a blessing that I had heard 1,000 times before. He said the same words of consecration. This is my body. And I looked up, and when I heard him say it for one split second, I just said to myself, what if? What if that's really God? What if that's really what he says it is? What if that's really who he says it is? What if? And that was the day that God went from being an if or a what to a whom. It was like God came really near, really close, and pulled me really close to him and said, you're mine, and I'm never letting you go. And that's why he comes to us in the Mass. That's why he makes himself so accessible and so available, because he wants your heart. We need the Lord within us if we're going to be able to affect a change in the world, because you have the power to change the world. The power to change the world flows from the church and from her sacraments. For 2,000 years, the same Mass, the same readings and prayers that the saints heard, we hear. God loves you. He wants to fill you with his life. The question is, will you let him?
Okay, that's an awesome video about the Mass. The second obligation, the twofold obligation of Sundays, is also we are commanded by God, and he is very serious about this too, which is, again, so crazy that he has to tell us this. We're commanded to rest, right? On Sundays, we're commanded, part of the Sabbath is to go to Mass, to honor and worship God, and then the second thing is that God has to tell us to rest. He has to tell us to slow down and enjoy things and to take some time off and to prop up our feet. Right? And again, that's so crazy. But again, the devil is trying to sabotage that and violate that, break that. Hey, you need to sign up for sports. Hey, you need to do this. You need to do the laundry. You need to go get groceries. Blah, blah, blah. All these things. Okay. On resting, let's look at this idea of resting, the Sabbath rest, the other part of Sunday, the other part of keeping it holy. Sunday is supposed to have a festive, joyful, restful, and restorative character, according to the UCAT, which is the Catechism for Young People. Okay? It's supposed to renew us. It's supposed to rejuvenate us. It's supposed to help us feel restored. It's supposed to help us have a break away from the normal grind of work and school and all these other chores, the things that I have to do that are going to keep things running. It's a chance to step back and think about bigger things and to simply enjoy being alive, right? To take some time off, to be with family, to be with friends, to be with our relationships, to call somebody and it's just to chat, sit down and have a meal, have all these things, right? That's God's plan for us. That's what God wants us to do. And so he has to command us to do it, right? So that we will actually listen. But so many of us, again, we don't. We look for ways to not do that. The Sabbath rest allows us to deepen our family relationships and friendships. If we're sitting around with our family, we go on a walk, we go on a hike, we go on a bike ride, we just sit around and have good conversation, we watch a football game, whatever it is. It's amazing to me how many people rebel against this. Basically say, I don't want rest. I don't want to sit down and just have a day where we sort of enjoy each other's company, right? Because for lots of reasons, but the main reason is that the devil doesn't want us to experience that. He wants to keep us from God's plan and God's desire for us to enjoy each other's company, to enjoy rest. It's supposed to allow us to take time away from our immediate concerns and rest in God and think about higher things. And ultimately, most of us, that's why we flee it. We don't want to sit around and think about higher things. We don't want to sit around and think about God. Where am I going? What is this world that I'm in? Why are there trees? Why am I hiking? Why am I, when I go for a walk in the woods, when I sit down and have a meal with family, when I stop doing all these things and stop the madness of just rushing around with my head cut, like a chicken with my head cut off, trying to get all these things done on Sunday, when I finally slow down, I also have to confront a lot of things. I have to actually think. I almost become like a philosopher and so forth. I have to think about, who am I? Life, death, these bigger picture issues. And so many people don't want to think about those, so they just stay in the rat race. So they just stay in the rat wheel and they just keep going as fast as they can. So they don't slow down like a shark. If I slow down, I'm going to die. That's what a lot of people think about themselves too. If I slow down and I take time to just slow down and exist and enjoy who I am and think about who I am and who is God and just enjoy the peace and the serenity of the day and take some time to cook a meal and get away from the internet or whatever it is that's distracting me and just enjoy being alive. People don't want that, and that's crazy, but that's how it is. That's the situation that we're in. Some healthy questions, things that help guide us. And this takes to shift out of that insanity Sunday that so many of us live to what God is asking us to live on Sunday takes a lot of time sometimes. It takes breaking these habits that we've built up over time. Questions that we need to be asking ourselves. Do I need to do it today? Whatever it is, whatever the thing is that's part of your racing around on Sunday, the sports teams. Do I need to be in 19 sports leagues or not? Do I need to do it today? My homework. Can I do my homework on Saturday? Or do I have to do it on Sunday? And a lot of times, part of living Sunday rightly means doing more stuff and being more efficient and working better and being productive on Saturday so that I can rest. So taking things like homework. Do I just wait and save my homework till Sunday so that I can do it then? Do it on Saturday so that the Sunday can be what it's supposed to be. Do I need to do the laundry on Sunday? Do I need to buy the groceries on Sunday? Or can I do that all on Saturday so that I can enjoy my Sunday rest? Do I need to be paying bills? Do I need to be doing yard work? And there's some things like yard work or whatever. It's not that we can't do any movement or exercise. Sometimes people following the Jewish observance too strictly, it's like I can't sit up or I can't, use my muscles. No, some people like going out and doing yard work. That's different, right? If you like planting flowers or you like cutting the grass or whatever, that's different. If that's what you just enjoy and that's refreshing to you, all right? But it's the whole running around and being busy and having to do things. That's the thing that we have to avoid. Buying groceries, paying bills. Another important question, am I forcing someone else to work on Sunday? We make decisions, the way we spend our money, the way and so forth, it speaks to what we value and think of as important. If I go to a mall on Sunday, if I ever buy anything on Sunday, I am in some way justifying and voting and saying this place needs to be open on Sunday. So that lady at the cash register, she needs to be here on Sunday because I want to buy this thing. And I just have it. And so as long as business managers are looking at their bottom line and saying, you know what, we're doing business on Sunday, they're going to stay open. If every Christian in the country stopped going to places, stopped going to grocery stores on Sundays, stopped going to restaurants on Sundays, and just started cooking a meal at home with themselves and their families, then the restaurants wouldn't stay open on Sundays, and the grocery stores wouldn't stay open on Sundays, and I wouldn't be forcing anybody to work on Sundays. And you might say, well, people need the bonuses or they need the hours. No, they don't. No, they don't. They don't need it. They just think they do, right? So we can all survive if we all just stop going to places and spending our money on Sundays and doing that all on Saturdays, everybody, the whole world benefits from that. The whole country, our whole community would benefit if everything were closed down on Sundays, except for the things, the power plant and the hospital. Everybody would be much better off. That's God's trying to give us that, but we don't want it. We don't want it. We reject it because we don't want to rest, because we don't want to enjoy each other. We don't want to think about higher things. We just want to stay in the rat race. There's a great book by a guy named Joseph Piper, who was a friend of Pope Benedict XVI, called Leisure as the Basis of Culture. He said leisure, this whole idea of enjoying, slowing down a little bit, he said it's a spiritual attitude. It's not just a result of having free time. If I give everybody free time, if God gives us all free time, how we spend that hour, or whatever that time is, let's say God says, here's an hour, here's an extra hour. Just because you have that free time doesn't mean that you're going to use it in the right way. It doesn't mean that you're going to use it to rejuvenate yourself, refresh yourself, and spend it in a positive way. You know, people might just turn on the TV for an hour and veg out, and they haven't thought anything, they haven't enjoyed anything. They've just watched the stimulation of electrons, right, and just kind of zoned out. You might go and just play some game. I'm not saying that TV or games or whatever, that they're always wrong, but I think we rely way too much on that, and we just waste a lot of our free time, right? We don't do things for the betterment of ourselves, to rejuvenate ourselves. And so how we spend our free time is really important and tells a lot about us. And we're not all using it. That's what God's wanting us to do. Use that time in a way that's healthy, that's spiritual, right? It's where we get in harmony with creation, and slow down and live on God's time and just rest in God. That's what God's asking us to do. He also said there is a certain happiness in leisure, something of the happiness that comes from the recognition of the mysteriousness of the universe. There's this sense in which when I'm really engaging in authentic leisure, I'm looking around the world and I'm asking, what's real? Who am I? What's going on here? In my life, when I've recognized that even though I work a lot on Sundays, right, at masses and so forth, but even that Sunday afternoon, if I get a chance to just sit back and enjoy that Sabbath rest, it changes everything. It's what God wants for us. And it's what, ultimately, it's heaven, right? It's what heaven is going to be. It's going to be resting and just enjoying and celebrating in God. I think if we can't enjoy a leisure, some people have said that hell is full of people that don't want to be in heaven. And I think that a lot of times what we see in our world today is a lot of people who don't even want to rest in God. They don't want that Sabbath rest. God's greatest gift to them, and they reject it. They can't handle it. And so I think in the same way, we have to be asking ourselves, if we don't want that rest that God's giving to us, that Sabbath rest, that opportunity to recharge, and spiritually, and just kind of rest in the mystery of God and enjoy each other's company and the gifts that God's given to us, we have to ask ourselves, do I even want to go to heaven? If I don't want that rest that God's giving, am I a person that would rather be in hell than in heaven? So I think we really need to think about that. I can't encourage you enough. I hope you go to Mass every Sunday, every holy day of obligation. I hope you enter into that Sabbath rest. Do the stuff on Sunday or on Saturday. Do all the stuff that you need to do. Get it out of the way. Don't just be, don't waste your Sundays trying to do more work. Rest in God, both by going to Mass and by spending some time in that Sabbath rest. Your one question for the day, there's no review questions from last time. There's not a bunch of questions that I want you to answer. Summarize in 4 sentences or more, 4 full sentences, okay? Some of you are kind of starting to turn in stuff that's like chicken scratchy, okay? So write out some real sentences. What did you take away from this? How would you summarize what the Sabbath is? You've maybe rattled off the 3rd commandment in Vacation Bible School and whatever, keep holy the Sabbath. What did you learn? What does keep holy the Sabbath mean to you? What are the components of it? What are the 2 things? What does it mean, etc.? Why? Explain to somebody in your own words in a paragraph what you learned from this class, and that'll be your only assignment for today. I hope that I'll see you at church on Sunday or Saturday night, and I hope that you're doing well. If I can ever help you with anything, please don't hesitate to call. We'll see you soon. God bless.